welcome to Show Studio. It's our first roundup of the season and we're going to be talking about New York Fashion Week. I think what's interesting is we've all been sat here for about 10 minutes not talking about fashion, just talking about Hillary Clinton and how excited we all are. But that's a nice way to kick off a discussion about New York because obviously it's such an exciting thing to be happening. But before we delve into our kind of dissection of the highs and lows and all the different shows, I'll let my wonderful set of panellists introduce themselves, starting with you, Lucy.
Hello, my name's Lucy Norris. I'm a trend forecaster and fashion historian.
Hello, my name is Mimma Viglezio and I'm a consultant.
Hi, my name is Alex Fury. I'm the fashion editor and critic of the Independent and I newspapers.
Okay, first big thing I'd like to talk about, which I think it's kind of happened in the fallout after New York Fashion Week, is Mark by Marc Jacobs, and there's a lot of change kind of at the house of Marc Jacobs. We've heard that after 3 seasons with Katie Hillier and Noella Bartley, Mark by Marc is closing down. Well, it's not closing down, it's being sort of enveloped into the main line, and there will still be items available at that price point, but the actual Mark by Marc line is going to be closing, and that Katie and Noella are setting up their own company, Hillier Bartley. Firstly, what did we think of the Mark by Marc show that we saw, and what's our take on that news?
Do you really want to start with my Jacobs? Okay, can we see a little bit of it? Sorry.
But what do you think of the news? What's your take on it, Alex?
I think it's interesting. It's something that other labels have done before, in the way that Dolce & Gabbana enveloped D&G into their main line, which is this whole idea of, I think diffusion lines were very popular in the 90s, and then people started to question what the reason for a diffusion line was and if they were still valid and if customers still wanted to buy a diffused version of a designer label. I think the only one that's done it really very successfully is Miu Miu, which has become something completely different.
But that's not
now.
really diffused. I don't think
But
that's
it was a diffusion line.
At the beginning it was.
Yeah, and now it's diffused into some, it's diffused so far that it's become a completely different thing.
A brand, yeah.
Which in a sense is a similar sort of thing to this. It's the idea that this is being enveloped so the main line can offer lower price points on certain pieces, and Miu Miu offers lower price points on certain pieces. I would say that Miu Miu offers a lower price point than you'd ever get on a Prada product. So it kind of covers that.
I think it's very much the sign of times, because as Alex was saying, diffusion has been in trend, and then it's been not in trend because it was a little bit ruining the brand equity of the brand it was born from. And then now, as we saw in the last fashion season, fashion is trying to go up again and becoming less democratic, etc., etc. So I'm not surprising, but also, I mean, when groups do make this decision, it's just because there's no money left. Probably the brand wasn't making as much money as they were expecting or wanting. It was so much better to say, okay, let's merge and have a different scale of price points. But I think at the end of the day, it's a totally business decision more than a brand.
Well, they have the IPO kind of apparently coming up, which hasn't been officially.
Preparing.
But also, I think this is, if you look at it again.
Can you expand on that? Because I don't think our viewer will understand what that means.
The kind of
Going
the public
public?
offering, the offering of shares, floating it on the stock market.
So to do
shares.
this would mean that Marc Jacobs would perform better as a whole company.
No, you have to prepare for that, because the financial community has to accept you and accept you.
I think it's streamlining, it's making it less complex as a company, and also I think this kind of superficially will be an easy way to increase profitability.
Exactly.
Straight away, if you're closing a lot of shops and
not superficially,
employing
very
people,
deeply.
then,
Absolutely.
but I
it
think
depends if,
immediately
like
will
you
make
said,
it look more
the
profitable.
profits will be.
It depends if the money's coming from
It's
there. I
cutting
mean,
the
like now
losses.
they might have a stronger foothold, for example, in the fragrance market or handbags. So, like you said, it's just that those sort of pots of, those pools of, the pots of money, or how many metaphors we want to use, they're drying up. So, and I think, like you said, with diffusion, it did used to be a lot more affordable than it is now. Like Miu Miu used to be affordable, Mark by Marc Jacobs, but they've all, like you said, upscaled. So then they're so close to the core brand. Well, Miu Miu's like the little sister twin, almost kind of sort of thing. But it calls into question, like, is it downscale enough so that you can achieve the volume of sales? And actually, if it's very expensive now, then, like you said, it feels irrelevant business-wise because you haven't got the scale, the the economies of scale aren't there.
So what's replaced diffusion? Do you think part of the problem is things like all these, designer high street collaborations that we're seeing, and like sort of, collaborations between sportswear companies and design? Has that kind of replaced the traditional diffusion? Because that is letting people buy into a brand without having to spend money.
Brands are producing a lot more product than they used to be producing. Dior have 12 different drops of product a year. They have 12 different kind of defined collections, and what goes in every month. You have Cruise, you've got the commercial lines that, Cruise is now being presented, but with most designers there's at least 2 other lines that you don't see. There's just, I think designers themselves are making a lot more clothes to keep a lot more novelty in the shop.
But where has the diffusion shopper gone? Because I completely agree with you, I think that...
But you've got contemporary lines now as well. I think that there are those contemporary lines. And the other thing is these commercial lines that aren't being presented on the catwalk are more competitively priced. They are printed t-shirts. You can go into Prada and there's a printed t-shirt with a bit of the brocade from the catwalk collection, which is still expensive, but it's not that expensive.
But also, let's face it, when brands started doing diffusion, which is a long time ago, I mean, the first one was Le Mas de Cartier, which is always my favorite example, that they had to run and close stores and take products back because it was killing the brand. But anyway, when brands started doing that was needed because the high street, the way we know it today, didn't exist. So the fact that the high street is so successful in selling designed and fashionable product at a lower price point makes diffusion less interesting and less important. And I think, as usual, as always, Miuccia was very clever when she decided that Miu Miu wasn't diffusion. She took it to Paris to make it like it's a different brand. It's not an arm of Prada. She made it into a brand, show in a different city. They declare to the press that Miu Miu was a brand and not a diffusion. Then of course it's designed by her and it has her stamp all about it. But it's not that less expensive, actually.
I feel like diffusion was about when people were in love with designer names and they wanted the name on something. So you would have something like, CK Calvin Klein or Bazar de Christian Lacroix, something
or
like
DJ
that.
by Dolce & Gabbana.
Yeah, but whereas,
or
Miu Miu never
Money.
even had Prada's name on it.
Exactly.
And it's a focus on design rather than a focus on, I want to buy a white t-shirt and I want the white t-shirt to have a designer name. And, I can't buy that from Dolce & Gabbana, so I buy it.
But people still say that this is Prada, and I would like, no, this is not Prada, it's Miu Miu, and it's a brand, so you shouldn't be ashamed. It's another choice. It's like having a group with different brands, and that's what you did.
I think what Alex says about contemporary is very interesting, and I think I was thinking about it the other day, actually, just with looking at who's reached the final of the LVMH prize and the kind of young brands that are coming up and what price point they're trying to slot themselves in at, and where we're seeing a lot of growth. And if you look, I'm fascinated by the model of Acne and how that has grown and swelled and become so successful, and I think that's very interesting. And
you look at something like Alexander Wang, and really a lot of what Alexander Wang does. I know he has Tea by Alexander Wang, but Alexander Wang itself slots in at a contemporary price point for the vast majority of it. Takoon has a contemporary line, has his Takoon editions. And the weird thing is they're not marketed as diffusion lines; they're marketed now as these contemporary lines.
So it's a slight
this Alexander Wang show, I don't think it's going to have contemporary price. Don't you think it's? You probably saw it in real life, but it looks quite expensive to me. Am I wrong?
I think
I feel it's going a little bit higher.
I feel like the beginning is really interesting in terms of the amount of workmanship that is on there, and at the end with the 90% sort of nylon, techno fabrics and the chainmail. But the middle, I've looked through the show about 5 times and I couldn't really tell you what's in the show beyond the first few exits and the last few. They just sort of meld in my mind into into those commercial pieces where I'm like, trousers, skirts, tops, trousers, skirts, tops. Creatively, nothing's
But I think that's what was so smart about this show, because I think it was a really strong exercise in styling and kind of casting, and the footwear really tied together. As you say, if you took the footwear off and that kind of wet hair, it is just very, very kind of the ethos of the collection is lost. But I thought this was a really smart collection for that, because you came over being like, what a strong statement, but actually when you look at it, it's not so much.
But that's why I want to know if you saw it in. Did you see it in a showroom?
I didn't see it in a showroom. I only saw it
because I think that would show the difference.
For me, I didn't really feel that it was a strong collection in terms of pushing things forward. I mean, that section just looks like Isabella Marant's section.
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
It's just, for me, I feel like he's sort of wading. He's sort of what's it called? He's just sort of
Treading water.
Treading water.
But I think why wouldn't he be? I think now I feel like I'm really defending. I did like this trade. I think it's also because he's at Balenciaga now, and I think he's a very smart. From looking at what he does, I think he's very good at knowing what to invest in and what to make as product and what to make as design. And I imagine now he's almost tiered his own label alongside Balenciaga. So Balenciaga is the kind of couture level of experimentation. His own label slots in there, and then T slots in there, T by Alex Wang. That's how I imagine it. So I don't look at this and demand what I would of Balenciaga.
Yeah, but except that doesn't happen at Balenciaga, really. I don't think he's succeeded in doing that. I'm a bit biased here.
I think he's trying.
Oh yeah.
The intent is there.
He is, but I don't think he's succeeding, so he has to be very careful about
I mean, he said things like, oh, the customer wants black, so I'm giving them black. And I'm just like, oh, come on. Like, I just feel we're getting to dangerous territory. I know Wang has become that, but, actually when he first came out, I'm not saying he was this radical kind of creative sort of powerhouse, but he certainly was very, very clever with what he was doing and deconning other people's sort of codes and the American dream and just reevaluating all that. And I just loved it and put it into that sort of downtown aesthetic. But now it's just, like Karl Lagerfeld would say, it's not a designer's job to give people what they think they need. It's a designer's job to give them what they think they don't even know they need yet. And I feel like
but I don't think he's ever done that with.
I feel that it's dry. I feel like he's drying out. At Balenciaga, it's not working, and here it's drying out as well.
I thought there was a wit to this collection, though. If you look, there's so much talk amongst if you look at kind of young what young people are wearing or reportage around streetwear. There's so much talk about health goth, all that kind of thing. And I think this riffed on a lot of moods that people are interested in.
And I'm really obviously as a trend forecaster been looking at this for the last sort of couple of years, this sort of American gothicism, and really interested with this sort of dystopian sort of this gothic kind of thing that's coming out of Brooklyn. But for me, the boots, and it's almost like a kind of there's actually nothing really fresh about it. It just feels like it's like with the Marc Jacobs show. It feels like a costume aesthetic around what gothicism looks like. These monster kind of mountains. I'm not part of this movement, but actually I'm very aware of the new movement, and this doesn't feel like that new fresh energy that's coming through. It feels like a cartoonish nod to what we think gothicism is.
But then isn't that when high fashion does subculture, it always is kind of a cartoonish nod to what we think subculture is?
Yeah, I just think the boots are pretty, I don't think they're very cool.
Lucy really didn't like it.
No.
Yeah.
But other than that, you loved it.
I loved the final section, and I loved the front section with the little Poindus freak, and he played on the little black Chanel dress and did the sort of studs that looked like a necklace, and the medieval sort of Tudor touches, and the final looks are phenomenal. But no, middle section, blah.
Alex, what did you think?
I thought it was very teenage, but teenage in a sense that it was a collection that felt like it had a lot of growing pains in it that he really should have got out of his system by now. He's 30, 31, he's been designing for nearly 10 years under his own label. This felt like a very juvenile collection to me, and it felt like something that really I would have expected him to do about 5 years ago. And then it would have been a bump and one of those collections that you tried to disregard.
Yeah.
But I have to say, in contrast to you two guys, and to jump forward a bit, I really liked for the first time what he did at Balenciaga. And when I looked back at this, I thought this was kind of a teenage collection and the Balenciaga was a grown-up collection. And it was almost to kind of force that contrast that he was obviously thinking very lady, very old school about Balenciaga. Yeah. And I think he'd almost push this to the other extreme to emphasise the difference between the two.
That's quite a strong statement that you say you would have disregarded this as like a bump in the road. Why did you think it was such a kind of misstep?
I just think it's really facile. Like, it's not developed on enough. It doesn't feel luxurious enough. I didn't see the clothes in the showroom, but when I saw the clothes at the show, it looked cheap. It looked really cheap. Like, there's a lot of velvet, and there was lots of kind of pigment coming off the velvet as they walked. You could see it in the air. The leather looked really cheap. The studs looked so cheap. The handbags looked really cheap. It looked really cheap. Oh, wow. It looked cheap and badly made. And actually, in contrast to Balenciaga, where when you were looking at it and there was so many incredibly complicated textiles and so many incredibly complicated treatments, and that all looked impeccably done. Whereas in the past, I think sometimes the Balenciaga stuff has looked a bit ropey as well. Like, you know, kind of odd techniques and things that haven't really been completely reconciled. This time it looked really fantastic, and it almost, this threw that into relief. Sometimes I feel like it's difficult with Alexander Wang because he is designing 2 collections simultaneously, and I feel like he, as a designer, focuses his passion more on one than the other.
Yeah.
And I feel like last season I felt Alexander Wang was very strong.
Yeah.
And this season I felt like Balenciaga was very strong. So I think it's that very difficult thing of a designer tussling with 2 identities
has
and
that got
2
anything to do with
such
seasons?
different identities.
Do you think, maybe it's too early to tell, but do you think they'll become, when there's a season that he's stronger at for Wang and a season that he's stronger at
like
Balenciaga?
autumn winter is better at Wang and spring summer is better
so
at
I wonder if he'll be
Balenciaga.
better with spring summer at Wang, just because he is quite sensual. He's good at doing those kind of great dresses that show quite a lot of flesh and things.
The athleticism.
So the athleticism.
I think it kind of depends what your obsessions are at any given moment. I think it's, you know, with plenty of designers, they have on seasons, they have off seasons, they have areas that they're better at than others. I think with Balenciaga, he is still figuring that out, and that's why I actually find this Alexander Wang collection disappointing, because I feel like he should have figured out what he's good at under his own label and what his own label represents. And that's why when I look at this, I have such difficulty reconciling it with what he did last season.
But that's why I feel like this is exactly what his own label represents, whether or not the clothes looked a bit ropey or whatever it is. But I feel like it's exactly what he does. It's taking this kind of popular movement, whether it's sporty, like, you know, the trainer fever from last season to this.
But I don't want you to be reflecting what's already out there.
But that's what he's always done. That's what he's.
I don't think it's what he's always done.
Do you know? What do
No,
you
I don't. When he did that American footballer collection, it's not like I saw girls going out wearing American footballs on their shoulders. And last season, I'd not seen girls going out wearing that kind of, you know, that kind of sportswear.
No, I don't mean I don't think.
And I feel that's what he's about. What he did last season, which is this idea of amped up, pumped up, you know, fashioned sportswear. That's actually what I think Alexander Wang is about. Not this. Like this, I think. I just thought it looked really bad. I was just sat there being like, this looks dreadful. This looks like cheap Camden goths in really hideous shoes that I can't imagine anyone wanting to wear, but I know people will wear them. And it was that horrible thing of, I hate it when fashion does something that's really hideous and unpleasant, you know, badly made, and then convinces people that they have to have it. This horrible system of fashion where it convinces you that you need to buy something that's really awful.
But does it convince people? Or
yes, it absolutely convinces people.
By
people will buy these Alexander Wang boots who would never buy Camden Goth boots. And that's what, there will be so many girls that will buy this because it has his name attached to it. In a weird way, it's like the designer diffusion lines of the 90s. Yeah. Because there's a designer name attached to it, that kind of justifies it.
But can I say something? Because Alex says something very interesting, saying that was Alexander Wang was, and here he's losing it. I think it's because of Balenciaga. I think it's because he feels that now he has to be a grown-up designer and do things at a different level. Then he's losing his spontaneity in here. It's like when people sing well and then they go to singing lessons and they lose it because they think about, you know, he's seeing a different technique. He's seeing the how do you call them, the seamstress in the Balenciaga studio doing things, and probably that influences him, and you see here, and then it doesn't come out right.
Yeah, you're right. So? I mean, I think it's that heavy-handedness, isn't it? That you, unless you really have a developed eye on how to sort of really sort of. I just feel like the heavy-handedness that was at Marc Jacobs is also here to a certain extent. It's that sort of, you know, that Louis Vuitton influence that they had on sort of Marc Jacobs. It's a similar thing here. It's like, let's come back and do, they're different collections, but I just feel like it's heavy, but it's not exactly, it's not desirable, and I don't know, it just feels like it's just, like you said, it's just heavy.
It's very difficult to have two schizophrenic things to do like this. I mean, there's nothing could be furthest than is, as you said, 30, which is not that young, but not that grown up either. And you have to be really good to manage to detach yourself from one and the other and be just doing things that you want to do.
I kind of wish he'd just done it all black. I completely agree. Those looks in the middle that looked so commercial, they kind of ruined it. I wish he'd just kind of gone all out and just done the whole thing black. At least then it would have been like a real commitment to the idea.
Yeah, and I just think that, like, for example, there are things that he could be doing as a designer to push forward American fashion, And I'm talking about casting here as well. Like, I counted, out of the 39 looks here, there are 9 non-Caucasian models. And I know I don't want to get on my soapbox about this, but actually there's a lot of young people that are looking to labels like Wang to address contemporary American sort of youth culture. And, you know, Generation Z, who are like the babies right now, they are going to be the first generation in America where Caucasians are going to be a minority in America. And that's why public school and Hood by Air and those kinds of labels are hooking in to representations around sex, gender, race. And I feel like just even in the casting, the girls look mean. A lot of this gothicism that's going on, it's actually going on within sort of like, you know, Brooklyn, multiracial communities. It needs to feel fresher. For me, it just feels like, yeah, anyone that loves Marilyn Manson in the 90s that's like now wants to share photographs on Instagram, it's kind of like a nostalgic view of gothicism. It isn't the fresh take on it. Like with the health goth, it's actually very, very kind of fresh.
I think it's interesting what you say about the kind of the diversity on the runway, because I also think there's a problem though, because even if he had cast this in a way that appeared at first glance more kind of representative, if you looked at it and kind of like over half of the girls were kind of different ethnicities, it still doesn't change the fact that he is designing and the clothes are cut in a way that suggests that they are built with a kind of Caucasian woman in mind.
No, exactly.
It doesn't look like it's been designed for like a diverse set of people.
And I don't like that either. I think that this cut as well looks really, really sort of like, that European. Maybe
exactly.
Maybe that's come again from the, you know, the European influence, but just, I don't know, I have a thing about, I mean, obviously, like, just looking through all the shows as we all have, it just needs to be, just needs to plug into the now a bit more, and actually just plug into the fact that all women are goddesses and beautiful, and we just need to be celebrating diversity a bit more.
But fashion's just not going to do that, is it?
It's not, but I can't not say it.
Yeah, no, of course. What do you think about it, Alex? Because you must feel a bit that when you're writing for kind of like a national newspaper, this idea.
I think there are worse offenders than Alexander Wang.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, no, they totally are.
But I feel like the people that really umbrage should be taken with are the people that are consistently refusing to cast anything away from kind of a Caucasian woman.
Like who?
There are designers, I don't want to talk about them because there are different designers and it varies from season to season. And also I feel like it's very difficult. Personally, I'm a white man, it's very difficult, I feel, for me to talk about racism in fashion because I don't think I perceive the racism that other people might perceive.
Tell me more about that.
Because I think kind of a person of colour viewing, even kind of the way that you discuss things like this, discussing it from a white point of view is immediately you're not going to be taken into account those, because you can't say, you know, I can't say how it feels because, you know, it's representative of my ethnicity and my culture. So I think for me to say that is very prescriptive, and I don't want to be the person making that judgment. I don't think it's fair for me to be the person making that judgment. No, I think you make a smart point.
I think we see it from different ways. Like I was with my friend yesterday, she doesn't work in fashion, and she's black, and we were talking about fashion, and I said, it's really, I was saying the kind of the typical thing that everyone says, it's really bad that you don't see more kind of diversity on the runways, and she kind of said a version of what I just said, where she was like, it's not just that. She was like, I don't like that designers, they don't know what parts of my body I want to emphasize and what I feel is sexy. She was like, when I look at high fashion, she was like, it's cut for you, it's cut for you wanting to look kind of slender and maybe like, you know, show off your lims. And she was like,
but then also that's, you can you can apply that to all kinds of people. I think I look at high fashion and I come from the north of England, and I look at what the vast majority of women in the north of England wear, and they don't want to look like fashion models. They don't want to look thin. They don't want to look like they have, you know, no hips and no arse. They, you know, they don't want to look very pale. They want to look orange. They want to have boobs out. I come from Bolton. Like, you know, they don't want to wear a coat in the evening. So I think to be talking about things and saying, no, it's not addressing lots of different people's
but
requirements.
I just think the world that Wang is in, which is which is supposed to be this contemporary, you know, he's an icon of, I think when he's fresh, you know, in terms of sort of he represents a lifestyle in New York and an attitude.
But also, I think it's
Asian. He's the son of immigrants, so
yeah, exactly. And I
I
just
think
think that when I look at these ones coming up, like whether and I just think that they are kind of chipping into that world which he should be sort of still kind of like.
But I think this is a proposal. This is his proposal. I think it's. Every designer is not going to satisfy everybody's needs, and that's kind of, you can't please all the people all the time. I think a designer shouldn't try to please all the people all the time.
But do you not think it is going to get to a point, and it's kind of interesting what Lucy mentioned about kind of how we're getting to the point where like Caucasians are in the minority. Do you not think it's going to get to a point where it makes no business sense to be only targeting white people? That's what I just don't.
We are in a point now where when clothes are produce that people, big houses like Chanel produce clothes that are tailored for the Asian market, that are physically tailored for the differences between Caucasian bodies and Asian bodies, and they stock those in London because China is the world's biggest tourism market. They're the world's biggest tourists, so those clothes aren't just available in China and Japan where they've traditionally been available. They're available all over the world. They're available specifically here because London is the #1 tourism destination for the Chinese tourist. That's something I read earlier this year. So I think that is being addressed, and you're making the point, don't you think people will address it when it makes economic sense? That's absolutely why that's being addressed. Because China is such a huge market.
That's the only reason it's been addressed. It's not an
Which is really
reason.
sad.
No.
It's really sad, but at the same time, it's not out of some kind of weird cultural imperialism.
I do think there is an element of that, though. I think that, I just think that kind of being white, being that thin, being that tall, I don't see girls that look like that very often, apart from being on the catwalk. And I just think that it's interesting what you say, when the markets come through where there maybe are more sort of, like South America obviously continues to boom, and Africa, and going towards this like even more petite silhouette. I understand, like you said, the casting and everything starts to reflect the customer, because the customer wants to see themselves and the customer wants clothes that fit them. But I do think that unfortunately that there is a misrepresentation that, I don't know, I don't want to, it's like the clothes at Marc Jacobs. They're so heavy, they're so worked. Who can wear pleats, long length, double-faced fabrics that have got embellishments all over them, apart from Lady Mary from Downton Abbey? Really, it's that kind of Edwardian build, or a model build that could wear all of
Lucy?
that.
But then I see that. Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. No, but I just to close this about the ethnicity in fashion, and I don't mean to provoke, but I don't think that everybody is racist here. I think it's just ignorance and superficiality. I think that that's the model of a woman on who clothes look well, especially when they're so heavy, etc. And that's what they do because they used to, they say, I hope it's not. I mean, it's stupid, but I hope it's not racist.
No, I'm not saying that Marc Jacobs. I'm not saying that Marc Jacobs is racist.
It's not a will. No, I'm not. I'm not
saying
talking about him
the
specific.
girls.
But I don't think there is a will of only casting Caucasian and only talking to the Caucasian market. I think there is a ignorance in thinking
I do
deeper.
think there are some designers who,
I think a superficiality more than.
But there are some who you can tell by their refusal to do diverse. They actively do think that. I guess white women are more attractive, and I think that's what's scary in a sense, because I kind of agree with what Alex said about this being Wang's proposition, and you can't kind of cater to everyone. I don't want to see a point where everyone's kind of pandering, but I do, and maybe there are some designers that design in a way where they think the most beautiful women in the world are only white. I just think it's up to us to then take issue with that and not just lap up that statement. Like, people shouldn't talk about Phoebe Philo like she's fantastic because her catwalk is racist. It's consistently racist. And it's like, it's fine if you like that aesthetic, buy into it, but I think it's weird that no one says it. It's really weird.
I think it's been said, isn't it? Maybe
well,
here, maybe
have,
on this
but
platform.
They also haven't. It's like, it's I don't expect her, I wouldn't prefer it if she turned around next season and did diverse casting, because I think she has proved that she thinks the most beautiful way of a woman looking is being very slender and white.
It's
so
her.
Actually, it's
they
her.
look like her.
They look like her,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not taking issue with Marc over race, and I'm talking about just wearability of clothes as well. Just sort of like the fact that that particular collection from Marc Jacobs, for me,
Can we look at them up too?
it felt quite inaccessible. There's a great little bomber in there.
Don't you think that was the point?
That was the point. He's an artist in making those postmodern pastiches around the fact that I think the collection wasn't meant to be that wearable. It was about the kind of the brick wall which you hit, where, like he said to Tim Blanks, you hate fashion so much you start to love it, you love fashion so much you start to hate it. And it's almost around materialism, sort of consumerism. Everything is so worked and so, you know, like the nails and the little point d'esprit are actually like nails, the hair's all lacquered. It's so impenetrable. The Cruella de Vil furs and the sort of the you know, the early sort of Chekhov. It reminds me of the Cherry Orchard. All this kind of idea of materialism, early 20th century, the fall of grace. But actually, I think it's really, really interesting as a collection culturally. But actually, I find it really, really heavy and unwearable.
See, I found there was like a joyousness to it. I didn't feel like, I think it's heavy, obviously, like the fabrications are heavy and it's laboured and it's layered, but I think there's this sense of kind of
there's a razor's edge definitely there. There's the joy within, you know, he said about Diana Freeland's sort of apartment being like the garden within hell, and that's how he feels fashion is for him right now. What is hell? Is fashion the hell, or is it the garden? So I think there's the razor's edge here, that he loves it, but yet he did this in 2009, spring, summer. He gets into this sort of like dressing up box. He dives into the dressing up box. The 2009 version was far more wearable because we actually just saw legs and stuff, and the silhouettes were just easier. But this, like, I mean, the fabrics here are phenomenal, you know.
But then it's interesting to see something that looks quite historical, because I do think in a way we talk all the time like women are dressing in a way that's more kind of like, you know, casual. Everyone's wearing trainers, everyone's running around in whatever they want. But actually, I don't think there's been many periods where people who buy high fashion think so much about what they wear, and it's so edited and it's so kind of like this one with this, and it is all these rules and regulations. I think there's an interesting to kind of contrast that with.
But that cape, you know, that I know Colin took issue with, that's a bit further back up, that has got that sort of Ray Kawakubo feel about it. He's, like we said about the cartoonish element earlier, he's almost pushing fashion.
That one, the yellow
big,
one.
the middle,
the yellow
golden
one. It's like, I don't know where her arms are, I don't know what's going on there. It's kind of like almost a Comme des Garçons sort of cartoonish sort of pastiche on fashion, and sort of it looks like he's commentating on the system here as well, you know, in terms of kind of like, I mean, it's not actually very well done, that look at all, and actually it's not a com look at all, but it's just that idea of sort of almost sort of pushing the envelope of what would we desire, is that desirable? I don't know, it's almost like he's playing around with the system of fashion here as well, just a bit like Ray would, and obviously he worships Ray. I don't know, it just...
I think, as you said, there's some phenomenal fabrics here, there's some phenomenal shapes. For me, the problem was, and of course he wanted that, but the problem was, for my taste, it's a bit too costumey to be relevant, and that's what we discussed with Colin at the time. Say that, I would like to be able to see singular pieces of it, less styled, and I think there's some extraordinary things in this collection. But the whole thing for me looks a little bit too costumey.
Fashion is costume,
but
it's not historical costume, but it is costume.
It's a bit historical costume, but I like the fact, and we discussed that too, that there's no elegance anymore, you know, there's very little elegance anymore going on, and here it's like, okay, let's go back to dressing up and wearing gloves and wearing beautiful things.
I think that's why I found it intriguing as a collection, because I don't think it is going back to anything. I think what he's doing is taking things that equate how we dress today with how people dressed then in these eras, which is, you know, it is just about costume as ever. It is just about kind of dressing up and styling yourself with all these kind of ridiculous little accessories and bits and bobs and completing the look. Whether, you know, today it's with kind of, you know, like Fendi bag bug thing, or like, you know, some silly pair of shoes and like, you know, statement earrings or whatever it is. Then it was about, you know, wearing the appropriate gloves to tea. I think it's about this idea of kind of how everyone still uses fashion as costume, and
I agree. I think there's definitely obviously points to still make about. I just think some of the looks were a bit lighter, and he did them in a bit more of a sympathetic fabric. They're not tailoring fabrics. They had a bit of stretch in them, and they worked a lot better. But like you said, there's a difference possibly between costume, which, like you said, we're all kind of in costumes really, and whether it feels a bit too historical at times in terms of.
What did you think, Alex? You really liked it, didn't you?
Yeah, it's my favourite show in New York.
Why was
by
that?
miles. I liked it in contrast to what Marc Jacobs has done for the past 2 seasons, which has very much been about that kind of ease of American sportswear. And I think it felt like those collections were very much a reaction to him stopping working at Louis Vuitton and pouring his attention and focus into his own label, which in an odd way resulted in it being completely pared down. It was almost like the decoration had been stripped back and everything had been stripped back to the bones. And in an odd way, this feels like it had been less worked than those and more of a kind of spontaneous, immediate reaction. I loved that the fabrics were so heavy. It felt like it was, again, a reaction to things like when you see Anna Wintour in the September issue, talking to retailers about making fabrics lighter. And I know from discussions with different designers that I've had, there's a lot of pressure on people to not use tailoring fabrics, to use lighter fabrics because they sell better across the board. It's easier to sell a lightweight coat because you can sell it in the Southern Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere in all different climates. So I love the kind of self-indulgence of this whole idea of proposing something that is, by and large, completely unwearable. But I do also feel there's that very odd seduction to this. You look at it and there's something really seductive about wanting to dress like that, and whereas in reality you'll only buy 1 or 2 pieces. It's an incredibly seductive whole, and this whole idea of it being inspired by Diana Vreeland and being inspired by kind of her love of fashion and Mark's love of fashion, and opening it with Erin O'Connor. I don't normally like talking about casting, but opening it with Erin kind of make believe as Diana Vreeland. It was wonderful. It was such a wonderful statement. I also feel like it was such a fantastic statement. I thought it was a really strong New York Fashion Week, first of all. And I felt like it was such a fantastic statement about American style and about us, what we all assume American style to be is the antithesis of this. And actually, if you look at this, it's Diana Vreeland, it's Gibson Girl. I thought that skunk looked like Pepe Le Pew. It's all these American references that make these, it's Norman Norrell. It's all these incredible references to American style and to a different kind of American style that we all think of when you talk about American fashion. It's not sportswear, it's about kind of American haute couture. It's almost like kind of Charles James in that sense of it being an alternative American style. And it really feels like it had genuine heart and soul in it. And that's the last 2 Marc collections have struck me as being quite cold, and a little bit bruised almost after leaving Louis Vuitton. But this really feels like it was something really joyous, something that he was really happy to do, something that he really wanted to show. It felt like a real presentation. It felt like a real show, and it was almost like him reclaiming that crown of, being the big cheese, the big cheese of the Big Apple.
I think it's not completely far away from the decision of the group to merge Marc by Marc and this one. It's very consistent with the decision of cutting off the diffusion line. And
because it's interesting that you mentioned like the Gibson Girls, Alex, but then they tapped into sort of like William Morris as well in the Marc by Marc. So they were kind of.
It was a collaboration with the William Morris estate to get those. So that was an actual heritage thing that they did. So, and references to suffragettes.
Suffragettes, exactly. So it's tapping into
and that elongated silhouette.
He was an activist, and the slogans, and they're trying to sort of cross those worlds. And I do think it's interesting. I think it's really weird though that they gave Luella and Katie like 3 seasons stretch on it and then cut it. Did they not know like 3 seasons ago that this might happen? Maybe they thought it was worth doing it.
I think they did.
I think the fact that
at least 1 year ago, because they prepared their own brand, they came out
already
with
got their collection
perfect
ready for
timing in communication. It wasn't a shock for them.
Right.
What do you think, Alex? You kind of pulled a face there.
I don't know.
Did you talk to them about that? No.
No, I didn't realise.
I don't know. By reading the way it was done, unless I'm completely naive here, I feel there was like
an awareness,
an agreement,
do we think this was a strong collection?
Because there are some of those, like at the beginning of this collection, there's like this long sort of like, whether you want to call it suffragette, this type, tomato. It's the suffragette Gibson Girl sort of silhouette that we saw at Marc Jacobs. Is also here as well. This one had quite a bit of punk in it as well, didn't it? In terms of looking at sort of, well, obviously there's lots of tartan and sort of it has. I like this collection actually. I like the clash. I like the idea of putting these activists, because the idea of educating the customer. William Morris wasn't just a wallpaper and fabric designer. He actually uses wallpaper designs to fund this political magazine.
He was a politician.
And actually, I love it when brands just bring sort of unexpected sort of pieces of sort of what they're educating the customer, and it's irreverent and it's fresh. And I don't know, I kind of like the clash of putting a slogan over a William Morris print. It looks kind of interesting.
We've talked a lot about the same few designers. I'm conscious that New York Fashion Week is massive as a fashion week, which is one of the things that people often criticise it for, that it is too long. What were the other highlights or surprises across the week? Anything else that really stood out and was really strong?
I love Francis Schooler. I love Tom Brown. I thought Peter Copping's Oscar de la Renta was very strong.
Should we talk about Oscar de la Renta? I think that's an interesting one to go to.
I thought it was, like I said, I thought overall it was a really strong New York Fashion Week.
Yeah.
I came away from there, and it's in a sense, it's slightly, there is so much to see that inevitably there's going to be a lot of dross, and inevitably there are so many more shows in New York than there are in Milan, Paris or London.
Yeah.
There is going to be more crap there than there is going to be, just by process of elimination. But the stuff that was really strong there was incredibly strong and really stood its own across the other capitals. And I feel like it did have it made a very strong statement, which was actually for this kind of diversity of talent, and it wasn't talking with this kind of singular commercial voice that a lot of people perceive New York to have. Rodarte, I really liked. Jason Wu, I really liked a hell of a lot in New York. I came away from it, and it's almost like you've seen, like I was sort of saying, you've seen so many shows that then when you start to go through the ones that you liked, you realise you liked a lot of those shows that you've seen.
I do want to say, I think you kind of gave us a little short list to work through there, which is great. I do want to stay just on Oscar de la Renta, because I think this was, in terms of just like pure news, this was a kind of notable show, because obviously they've had a change in creative director, and we've now got Peter Copping there, and I think he did a really nice
he did a
job.
Really good job.
Especially because there's a lot of him in here, of Peter in here, what he is, what he's been at Vuitton and at Nina Ricci, yet it's so respectful without being trying to copy, without being... I remember, I don't know if you remember the first show of Facchinetti on Gucci just after Tom Ford, and that was a disaster exactly for the opposite reason. She was trying to be Tom and she wasn't. And what Peter did here was very clever. He brought a little bit of his Parisian flair into such an important brand.
Well, I think that's it was a tricky position for him in a way, because I think we're used to seeing a designer go into a house where it's kind of there's almost a little bit of a tension. There's almost a sense that they're going to redo it, or that they've come in a period of difficulty, and everyone's wanting change, whereas actually in a way everyone just wanted this. It's already doing well, there's nothing
Don't
to
forget, he just had died, so everybody was still emotional, everybody, it was, his pressure on this was incredible, unbelievable. I think he did an amazing job.
I think the last few dresses, the long ball gowns though, did look a bit, they didn't really, other people picked up on it as well, they didn't really fit that one. I mean, he only had 3 months, I think, though, to make this collection. I think the plan was for him to work alongside, obviously, Oscar, and sadly that never happened. So, I think he's done a wonderful job. I think what he did at Nina Ricci was beautiful, and like Mimi said, you can sort of see it all kind of organically coming from houses that femininity.
It was just there was like a real it was quite polite. It was quite. I thought
was polite. That's
which
the
was,
word.
but it was. I thought it was nice. There's the sense of looking. I don't mean the fashion is really
quite
beautiful.
a damning thing to say.
What?
I thought it was nice.
No, but I mean, like, I think
last thing a designer ever wants to
No,
do,
I didn't mean the
It's
collection.
just
I just mean the whole way it was done. It was very, polite. I think and pleasant. And I think in a way, like, you don't see that much of that in fashion. You see a lot of things being kind of quite punchy or quite severe or quite this. And I think the whole way this was done,
there was a kind of tenderness to it.
Yeah, exact
tenderness.
You can say that for the first collection after Oscar,
it's
because
just
it needs to be also
But as well,
right.
I actually think it was very difficult, because there's, the thing that I felt was really intelligently done in this is that it had a sense of youth without being overtly young.
Yeah.
Whereas actually sometimes when Oscar did young, you looked at it and all the hemlines were a little bit too short, and all the fabrics, you know, I remember going to one that was inspired by punk, and there was like latex and ostrich feather, like a hot pink latex and ostrich feather mini dress, and this could easily have gone in that we've got to be young, but I think there was also a lightness to it, which was there were these kind of lingerie touches that were actually incredibly Peter and not very Oscar at all, but the weird thing is you can't really, you can sort of tell it a little bit when, you know, things have transparent panels, but a lot of stuff was open at the back, and you would see kind of a bra strap, or things would be tied with a black velvet ribbon, and the ribbon would just be knotted. It wasn't sewn in. There were these incredibly subtle touches of a lightness and easiness, something being a little bit undone, that kind of indicated, oh, that's the direction you're going to very gently take this in. And that it does have your hand. It's not just you reissuing stuff from the archive, or just you know, it's not you desperately clawing after what Oscar wants.
And you're right, that's a way to make it useful without it feeling
Well, the other thing I think is important is Oscar chose him to take over. It's not somebody that's been shoved into the brand. Oscar de la Renta selected him as the person to succeed him. And I think possibly he knew he wasn't going to be around that long. I know that they sugarcoated it, but I certainly think the appointment and Oscar passing came very quickly. And they probably knew that it was much more imminent than they were letting on. I just thought it was very classy. It was very classily done. It was very...
That's what I mean when I say nice.
Respectful. It was very tender. There was a huge amount of affection.
He put down a note on every chair saying that an honour it was for him.
But then tons of designers do that in a sense, like. But then I think there was something.
But not many are appointed by the designer.
Exactly.
Not many
That's
have
what I mean. It was very
a relationship. Well, I talked with John Galliano, and he actually said that he wanted to meet Matar to talk about taking over Margiela because he never got that chance to meet Uber de Givenchy, and because of the situation around him taking over Givenchy would never meet him because Givenchy was so upset that he was leaving his house and that John was taking over, and he felt very and he felt in a way that he really wanted to have had that kind of approval or that feedback. And I think the fact that Oscar was appointed, the fact that Peter was appointed by Oscar.
It's even better because it was his choice. And this show tells us how smart of a choice it was. I mean, nobody was really surprised when Peter was announced because we could all see this. You know, I was much less surprised than Alexander Wackett Balenciaga. You know. But it's not that I mean to cut this short, but I really would like to talk about Rodarte because everybody loved it so much, and I really need you to explain to me why. And I was looking at, I mean, I've never been a fan of Rodarte, but I'm really trying because I think I don't understand something here, but I also see here, and maybe you're going to yell at me, there is trying to be a little bit Saint Laurent by Hedi Slimane in certain looks and styling, and not... Please, Alex, tell me why I should like this show.
They've
always had that like LA kind of like,
but
it's slightly trashy.
Or maybe, but I
think that's part of their upbringing.
There's something about this show that really gets on my nerves. I can't like it.
Actually, the reason I liked this show was because they haven't always had that trashy LA thing. That trashy...
It has developed in the last few years, though.
That trashy LA thing is something that has been developing onwards. And what this made me realise as I was watching it is how admirably they have slipstreamed from the sort of floaty chiffon mohair, chopped up, chewed up dresses that they used to do into something that's tougher and harder and is more day wear, more constructed garments, more separate.
I don't think they've done that like subtly or slowly.
I think they've done it incredibly subtly and slowly.
No, I think they've done it really well, but they haven't. They did that collection, and I can't remember the season. I think it was the one where it was like incredibly trashy, and it was like all the little shorts and the little white.
But they had things coming in before then. It's not. I think a lot of people are like, but that had been building up for a while.
I think I agree.
And then last season they reintroduced the dresses they used to do, so now it's like the whole aesthetic has melded together.
Yeah, I agree it's been very successful, but I don't think it's been subtle. I think they've done a couple of strange kind of segues, and then I think this brought it really together really successfully.
Yeah,
that's
you're right,
that
collection.
Well, my feeling is the opposite, is that sometimes I don't see where they want to go. I don't feel they know exactly, but I admit, I'm probably the only one thinking like this.
They can't do those dresses that those are, they can't base their business on those kind of fairy tale dresses. But at the same time, I think they realise they have to have them. My slight issue with it looks like Eddie Slimane Saint Laurent is that I just think Eddie Slimane Saint Laurent just looks like clothes. So yeah, it looks like clothes because everything looks like clothes because it's just clothes.
No, I talk about the styling, the
no,
little dresses, a little bit of visit to the thrift shop and those tights. There's something here that I don't know who is really referencing.
I really want to make a little video of Alex saying really quickly on a loop.
GIF file.
Well, it's
everything looks
we
like
all know
clothes.
my Eddie Slimane.
I know what you mean about it. It's very kind of young with the little pants and.
But I think as well there's this odd thing where you're at a show and you feel the energy and the energy's either up or the energy's down, and you can come out being like, oh, I really like that. And sometimes it's really difficult to ascertain why. And for me, it's just like, oh, well, they know what they're doing, they've done it, you know, they do it really well. And I do think they do what they do incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that the thing that I like now is that it used to be such an incredibly specific look. And I feel now it's an incredibly specific look that's totally different.
Yeah.
And the fact they've evolved from that original fairy tale
But then
mohair
you can still
thing
see
into
it, like
this.
look at that look there, if we
Yeah,
get the one in the
exactly,
middle,
that
that
it's-
bottom, it's like that sense of things kind of falling off and being kind of layered.
but it looks completely different.
Yeah,
It doesn't
exactly,
look the
yeah,
same.
yeah.
It
But
has
they're
a
like
sense of it.
they're obsessed with like I love Lauren Kate Malaby. I think
Yeah.
they're so super talented. This isn't their best collection ever, I don't think. And I can understand why you might not feel that it's. I mean, I don't think it's their strongest collection, but I love their sort of irreverence. They are very, very deep designers. Like you said, they're sort of like very, very influenced by where they come from. I think their mother's, works in sort of botanical biology, and
But also I just think the girls they looked at when they were growing up. And
yeah,
like
they're
that kind
obsessed
of
with
thing,
like Japanese horror. They're really into Gothicism. They're really into, do you remember they did that crazy MAC lipstick collection that had to get pulled that was all about the border towns where women were getting killed. They've got a really, really dark, sinister side to them, and I do think this sort of, it is a sort of this more of a trashy element, has popped through a couple of times in collections, and it is here again, and I think the disco is that again. Exactly, the disco dresses at the end, people might look at them and be like, oh my goodness, they're so bad taste, but they do kind of engage with bad taste quite well, I think.
Yeah, like so well. I completely agree. No, I agree with you. I don't think it's their strongest collection, but I think it was a very strong collection. But then I think there's always, like, I will always feel really nostalgic for those really early collections. I thought they were so
they
beautiful.
were phenomenal. Yeah, they. But there's some dresses in here to die for, and some of the looks at the beginning I love. The outerwear, they're using that sort of that you can see. I don't know, some of it doesn't feel very there. You can see them broadening out.
Well, I want to see how their business develops and grows. I think that's one thing that people often say about Rosati. It's like, where do you get it? And I think that it's interesting to see.
Opening ceremony in LA is
But
the only place I've ever really just walked into a shop.
Or they do their pre-orders and stuff. But I'm interested to see how it grows and changes. And
I have no idea how the company does financially.
No.
I have no idea. I would never really know.
I think they do very well off at certain collaborations and things like certain projects that they work on. I think they are very good at working with different institutions.
But they did that collaboration with Starbucks as well. I mean, it was so wrong. I mean, I love
They've just done Supergirl shoes.
I love the Alexander Wang collaboration with Starbucks a few years ago, which was this splash of coffee, which looked like somebody had run for and again, I don't know, I kind of like this sort of postmodern engagement with like mass culture, but I was surprised that they did Starbucks.
I think they obviously just need to keep a business going.
Money,
I think the one thing that should be said is whether you like it or whether you don't like it, I feel like it's a very distinct aesthetic, and that's actually in New York, where you go to so many, you do go to a lot of shows, and you feel like they're mimicking different designers, and you feel like a lot of the time it can kind of become this morass of stuff that just all looks the same. This feels like something that looks very distinct.
But do you not sometimes think that if you're good in New York, then you'll be, you'll get more recognition and get talked about more than if you showed in Paris? Because I often think that some designers who show in New York are perhaps not as fabulous and as creative as they're made out to be, but it's because they're showing in a city that is not known for having young creative talent, so they become the kind of like bastions of young creativity. Whereas if they were in Paris alongside other people, they perhaps wouldn't get that same attention.
But on the flip side, I think also New York is so massively commercial. When I go as a newspaper journalist, and I don't have enormous commercial pressures when I went as the editor of a Condé Nast title, there were so many commercial appointments that you had to go and see. There is a massive commercial infrastructure there of advertisers, so it's as difficult being a small designer there as anywhere else to get that attention, because a lot of people just can't go to your show because of advertising pressures. I would say New York is on a par with Milan in that difficulty. That Milan is probably the busiest because it's the shorter between New York and Milan's shorter, and Milan's the one where you have 25 appointments a day.
But one thing that I found really interesting, being just like, sharing taxis or being in the cars with different editors over the last probably only like 2 seasons, is a lot of the editors who work for those big magazines have started to say that Paris is becoming more of the focus for that and Milan less so. So they're seeing more and more
commercial focus.
In
New
Paris,
York is also a big focus.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
But when I worked, New York had a lot of new brands, because you have brands like Philip Lim and Jason Wu that are starting to become enormous brands. Jason Wu had his company bought out last year. He's opening his first store. He advertises in major magazines. They are building brands that advertise, and really for magazines that's what determines your schedule. Is satisfying advertiser requirements, and also seeing the clothes that you will have to work with because they're advertisers. Whereas as a newspaper, I can go to New York and it's quite indulgent that I get to go and see the shows that I think are relevant, the shows that I think are exciting, can meet with designers, can interview them. It's an entirely different schedule, and it's very much thrown into relief in New York, I think, because there are so few shows that I actually go to.
Let's talk about Jason Wu, because I think it's interesting. Right at the start, you mentioned growing pains, and I read that piece that you wrote, and I think it was during New York Fashion Week, and it was really nice. And you talked about lots of different people kind of experiencing growing pains, and in some sense, some of them were kind of like coming out of them okay, and others were floundering. And it is a time of change, I think, for lots of different designers there, whether they're just in the process of, like you said, doing something like opening up a store and reshaping post-investment, or trying to expand out into sort of certain different accessories or what have you. And I think Jason Wu's kind of at that period where you think, there is steady growth, but I think you also look at it and you think that it is a time for change, and then the new things that he's going to introduce. I think he'd introduce, is it jewellery that he'd done this season?
He introduced jewellery this season. His handbags were introduced a couple of years ago, do very well. He's got Miss Wu, he's building it into an empire. I think the very interesting thing actually is, again, to look at how this has evolved and how it feels like it's dressing the same woman that he's always dressed, but in a very different style. I think there's incredible maturity to what he's doing, and when you look at this, and it is, I don't want to say it's not ostentatious, because we're just about to see like a full-length fur coat, which is apparently the best-selling thing that they did, is a full-length fur from this collection. But it's ostentation in a very different way to a beaded ball gown. It's about double-faced cashmere skirts, and also I really love that kind of slight sexiness to a skirt that's slit a little bit too high, to the fact that the dresses were all backless, which is clever as well, because you're thinking about different climates, which is, I love Marc Jacobs because he didn't think about that, and I love Jason Wu at the start of the week because he was very much thinking about the fact that his clothes have to translate, between sort of Abu Dhabi and the Antarctic. You've got to satisfy all your clients in between there if they've got enough money. I think the interesting thing with Jason Wu today is seeing a certain severity, which I think maybe Hugo Boss has brought out in him. When he started to do Hugo Boss, everyone was sort of like, oh my, how is he going to do Hugo Boss? How is he going to do a collection that's so based on this kind of rigor, this sort of Teutonic tailoring, this incredible sharpness. And it's really interesting to see that's actually, rather than him making Hugo Boss all about ruffles, or rather than his own label then becoming all about ruffles, it actually seems to have influenced both, that there's this sense of kind of strictness to both of them.
For sure.
I think, and this is much more in that kind of American sportswear category. It's I think about last season I said it reminded me of kind of 90s Donna Karan, Marc Jacobs, Donna Karan, Michael Kors, Calvin Klein.
Which is interesting what you say about him kind of dressing the same woman but evolving it, because if you think, even like a few years ago people talked about him as like Park Avenue princesses and this very idea, whereas now it's so sporty and kind of...
I think Joseph Altazara and Prabal have really done a lot for that, like the slits, which are both at those collections as well, are just phenomenal. Like, I totally want a slip
I
dress.
wasn't mad on this Altazara
I liked it. I think, I mean, that's my opinion. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I liked it. I felt like...
Me too, it was one of my favorites.
Was
with
it?
Princess Cooler, yeah.
I thought it was lovely, but I feel like there's a sense of... I like what he does because I always feel like there's something a little bit kind of wrong, and you always kind of look at it and there's something
There was nothing wrong in this collection.
Yeah, exactly.
Was, I felt like it was very safe.
Yeah.
It was pretty, but safe.
You know,
I felt like it didn't cut it.
Why safe?
Because there's nothing that really jolts you.
Yeah,
I like the
exactly.
pastel furs, the baby pink pastel
That's what I mean. I liked it. I looked at it and I was like,
but
oh, that's nice.
But a baby pink pastel fur is a bit Barbie. It's like,
well, but it's not very Joseph,
but it's not
within the collection it costs.
So why wasn't the Jason
enough.
Wu collection not safe? I think
I
had the feeling.
But I look at designers and demand different things from different designers. I don't demand everybody. You know, I think what Altazara set himself up for, or set himself up as, is somebody that innovated season after season, that pushed ideas, that showed things that you might not immediately think were right, but that could actually grow on you, that might never grow on you. And also that in a sense, he was one of those young American designers that were kind of a touchstone for other young American designers. See someone doing something very creative. True. Whereas I think with this, and the other thing that I think is great about Altazara is he has a silhouette that he owns, which is that slit skirt, a certain cut around the waist. It's very interesting to see a designer having a silhouette that is their silhouette, that they can translate into different fabrics. So I like that consistency, but I feel like he's done some collections that have had very bad critical reactions and possibly very bad commercial reactions, and he's done some collections that have had very good critical reactions and very good commercial reactions, and I feel now he's focusing on those, which is kind of a natural thing to do. But I like designers that take risks.
Yeah,
and I think
but
what Jason does takes risks.
Don't you feel the influence of the big group coming in and being his partner?
Yeah, the big group.
He has his first handbag in this collection.
I don't like the furs.
He's got more money to do things. He's got his first handbag. They didn't invest majority, but they probably will. But they said to him, you have to become more commercial. I mean,
it's a tentative.
I think my issue with the collection since then is they've all felt a little bit tentative. And what you really want him to do is go and nail the idea.
But I still thought there was a lot of him, and it was a little bit more.
But I think
commercial,
it was too much him. It felt like he had a checklist of what he does well, and he was like, right, I'll do that. So I looked at it, and I did like it. It was beautiful. It's incredibly well done. It's very him, but there's not that kind of punch that you expect.
Yeah,
there's
probably
not that
you're
kind
right.
of.
But
we're not
talking about that. But
I also agree. Looking at it as pictures, I liked it much more than my experience at the show.
Okay.
Which, in a sense, is that it's grown on me, but also I feel like. I think I came out of that, and the thing that I wrote about it was that I found it very disappointing.
I remember.
Which is very difficult to write, because I think he's a fantastic and an incredibly talented designer, but I came out and felt really disappointed.
I couldn't help but look at it and imagine if we'd have seen this as the Gucci, if he had gone to Gucci and then we'd have seen this. I just kept looking at it and thinking it like that, because it's such it's so different in that sense, and I think it's from what we did end up seeing at Gucci and from the direction that Gucci's going in now.
I think the majority of the collections, I mean, I do this thing where I select like 9 key looks that I like from the collections. That's how I kind of go through them. And you can more or less like most collections if you do that, but this collection does need an edit.
Yeah,
as do
a lot of the collections. There are elements of this collection that I don't like, and they probably are the more traditional, heavy elements coming through that I can see.
Then you've got to think of his place within that group.
Well, no, absolutely. I can see that's being caused by the investment.
Yeah, but not just caused by. I think he's carving out more of a voice now when he compares himself to other people. There aren't that many people doing this kind of thing anymore.
He's obviously got an influence on his brand now outside of himself, and that may be, like Alex is saying, hampering his innovation. Because, like we spoke about earlier on, you're just trying to please 2 agendas.
Yeah.
Basically.
Could we look at Proenza?
Yeah. I thought Proenza was probably the strongest collection for me.
It's their best show.
Oh, it was amazing.
By miles.
And I was so surprised that they were going to such a distance, and I wouldn't expect it. And I was like, wow.
Yeah,
this is someone who's growing up and
going and expecting certain things from designers. When you go and you don't expect something this. I think Proenza are fantastic, but I went and I didn't expect this, and I was really blown away when it came out.
Couldn't agree more. I thought it was one for me. It was probably one of the 2 or 3 that stood out.
It
was quite heavy though, so maybe.
Well, no, but I liked the way they worked.
But it
with,
was
like,
a clever heavy.
They worked with Robert Morris, the abstract expressionist fabric designer, and they were inspired by the fact that he kind of let like fabric hang and opened it up. It had a Rodarte trashiness to it, that kind of, again, the tights underneath and all
For
the
me,
body
it
that
can't
was.
be compared, but
No. One little the section where you could see all the body and the fabric was open. That was something that I've never seen them do before, and they are one of my very favourite designers.
I think there was a lot here, actually. That's a very interesting point. There was a lot here that you'd never seen them do before.
Yeah.
I actually liked that sort of. It was interesting. They showed in the Guggenheim before the Guggenheim closed.
Yeah.
And there were specific arty references, but actually I think there were so many kind of general intelligent art references you could read. Like the felt reminded me of Joseph Beuys. There was lots of bodywork stuff that I think I wrote about it being very corporeal, the whole thing very visceral. There's a real kind of meatiness to these clothes that, things that have been hacked apart, things that look like innards spilling out.
It's also just funny because I looked at it and it references this the bandage dress, which is just like the cornerstone of what women with money buy. It's like a nice funny bandage dress.
But they've actually done that before as well. They've done kind of, perverse versions of the bandage dress before. There are references to stuff that they've done before, the fraying.
Exactly.
But it's funny, it's what
the
kids are doing.
Yeah, but it was that interesting clash between what they're known for and what they do very well, and what they've never done before that I thought was what made it really interesting, because it did feel very them. But then
that's the other interest, and that's kind of what they did felt very them, what Rodarte did felt very them, what Jason Wu did felt very him. And I also the other one I keep talking about is Tom Brown, because I thought Tom Brown was really.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. Like a really incredible show, really incredible presentation, filled with clothes that people could actually buy without going crazy.
It's very difficult to understand it the same way when you look it online.
Yeah.
I think his presentation needs a physical presence.
Yes,
But the clothes are pretty outstanding.
I think this time the clothes aren't actually, they don't distance you in the way that his clothes have in the past, because sometimes it's too bright, it's too embellished. You stick embroidered lobsters on something, you're limiting your audience somewhat.
A little bit niche.
But also I think with this, when you look at it and it's just incredibly beautiful black clothes done, and in a sense, in a weird way, because it was more difficult to see, it made you look harder at all the embellishments and how beautifully everything was made.
But it's very
and it was really
absolutely
incredible. And I think it's incredible that he makes a lot of his clothes in America and is very passionate about that American craftsmanship. And the fact that it's kind of still possible to make these clothes, I found that a really sort of uplifting experience. And that someone could use it in such a creative way that actually felt, it had historical references, but it felt contemporary. It wasn't like I was seeing a lot of Victorian mourning clothes.
To say, I think there is, and that's what not many people brought up. I think there are some historical references, but it's so relevant to contemporary times. And that's the difference for me between this and Marc Jacobs, where I don't feel this so costumey. I feel it relevant. I could buy it. I don't really wear black, but I could buy it all.
It's cleaned out of all that theatricality.
And people were talking again about Victoria. No. This is much more contemporary. It's a fresher take of historical references, and I think it was fantastic. But I didn't see the presentation, so I didn't have all the emotion it was going with. I like the white in the background.
The references to like the Nick, the TV program on a moment in the States, and it's just like, it's just, I love it. I just think it's really, really cool.
It's very modern, very modern.
There's a lot we haven't discussed, but I'm conscious of time. So, are there any people we've missed? What are our takeaways from the season? What did we? Alex keeps saying it was a strong New York. Do you guys agree? It's certainly thrown up a lot of discussion.
Well, I think it was a strong New York, especially for what we actually have discussed, because and that's why they came up. We didn't mention Victoria Beckham. I don't know what everybody thinks. There was a time where I thought she was doing amazing. This time, I was a little bit more doubtful. Is that the right word?
We haven't spoken about Calvin Klein either.
Oh, the Calvin Klein was pretty good.
I liked Calvin Klein, and I quite liked this as well. I mean,
it is what it is.
It is what it is. I like. There's pieces that I'm like, I'd wear that. In terms of a little cardigan coat and stuff like that. She has this ability to sort of sanitize luxury. You know, even when things do look like cozy and undulating and interesting, it's her and it's so polished. It can sometimes feel a bit sanitized, but there are some nice few emotional pieces in here.
I think it was not as strong as her two last ones,
but again, the last one with the boxy silhouettes wasn't well received. So now she says, I've gone back to what people want me to do, which is dresses. So again,
but
it's
that's
a theme
the problem
of this.
when people do things because they think about what other people
exactly.
think,
It's
and I
very
think
a
you can
strong
see
theme
it
of this panel, isn't it? It's
Why
like,
is she showing in New York? Is
I
she
think
afraid of showing here or in
I
Paris?
think, personally, I think showing in London opens you up immediately to a lot of tabloid. I interviewed her around this. I previewed the collection, did an interview with her, and as soon as the interview went up, our fabulous housemates, the Daily Mail, extracted all of her quotes and wrote a piece about it and illustrated it with a picture of her from about 2007, which I actually felt was personally very unfair. It wasn't a particularly bad piece, but immediately I felt like you're using this image of her that she doesn't feel is herself anymore. That's the past. And she actually talked about the fact that she's designing today and the high heels and the dresses she did at the start were right for then and they're not right for now. And that's her kind of evolution. And she is a creative director in the way that Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen are creative directors. And I find her fascinating because I think she represents a massive shift in fashion and in our perception of what a creative director / fashion designer actually means. I think now when celebrities decide they want to be fashion designers, they want to be like Victoria Beckham. They want to have her kind of brand and her kind of credibility. And she does have genuine credibility.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it was in one panel here where I was kept saying, I hate to say how much I love it. So at the beginning I had the same prejudice, and I think, and some people say you look as if you were her PR because I protect her. I am so respectful. This collection for me was less strong and
but
less
I think as well the fact that we're
amazing.
Discussing it in that kind of sense,
that's why I brought her up.
The same way that we discuss Altazara is, the same way we discuss any of these other designers in New York. We're not saying, oh well, this is Victoria Beckham and she can't design clothes anyway, so of course we don't like this.
Oh no,
that's not what. But that's not what anyone's saying.
That very easily could have happened.
And exactly. But it's now, we don't discuss the merits. We would never discussing the pros and cons of Jennifer Lopez's baby fat line. It was, we never baby fat was Kimora Lee Simmons. But we're not discussing the merits of Kimora Lee Simmons.
Didn't she have a really early one that was called like Sweet
Face?
Sweet Face.
Yeah, maybe that was the.
But the difference between what you mentioned in these or the Olsen sister is that they're sustainable. I mean, they sustainable not in the sense of CSR, in the sense that they resist sometimes because people, they don't get anything just because there is a name. It has to be a good product. It has to mean something in the industry.
The other thing, people aren't buying it because it has her name attached.
No.
Do you not think?
No.
Not anymore.
Or
not for many seasons.
I think a huge majority of the people buying it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, are buying it because of her name. And I don't think it's because she's a celebrity. I don't think they're like, oh, I love Victoria Beckham, I want to buy it. I think it's more like because they're like, oh, she does really nice, classy clothes. They trust her name. They think
they're not buying it.
I think people that buy Victoria Beckham are not the one that would have bought Victoria Beckham because she is Victoria Beckham.
Yeah, there's definitely change.
It's more
they buy it in the way they buy
they
product
don't
because they
care.
trust the label.
But I think you saying they're buying it because of the product and they trust the label. Really, that's not about her. That's about the product.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's a very good product and a very good label, and it's doing really, really well.
In the same way that you buy. I'm trying to think like. I don't buy Celine because it's Celine. I buy Celine because I know it fits.
And
it's those kind of, and it's made really well and those kind of things. And her clothes are incredibly well made, and exactly. And they fit people, and people that buy it have a brand loyalty, and that's how she's building that. I think it's very interesting to see that evolution, and that I don't think anyone expected that it would happen. And still, there's this very interesting question that comes up when you talk about her, which isn't people asking, is she a good fashion designer? It's people asking, should she be allowed to call herself a fashion designer? I still think there are, outside of fashion, there is that question.
Because then,
the vitriol Victoria Beckham ignites when I write anything about her, on anything about her goes onto the independent website, the vitriol that comes out, that spews out of people,
I totally
absolutely
believe it.
shocks me.
But
It happens to me at dinner parties.
Absolutely shocks
And people
me.
are like, why are you defending her? Because she's good.
Yeah.
And I don't care if she has a pencil in her hands and does it because...
Then look at fashion.
Nobody
Go see the
designers
Dior and I
that do.
documentary.
I
That
just saw
doesn't
it,
sketch.
yeah.
And,
He
you know,
doesn't
JW
sketch.
Anderson is like, I'm not a designer, I'm a creative
Exactly.
director. Like they all do
Exactly.
it now.
And everybody says, oh, Roland does it, but Roland doesn't sketch either. And by the way, he's not doing it. But you see what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so I totally agree with you. And I think she's amazing in what she's doing. This show, I was
But I
less
think
taken by.
you were saying, why does she show in New York?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
actually the way she approaches fashion is a very New York approach to fashion, which is that she approached it from a business point of view. I think here, if she showed here, she'd be compared and contrasted with different designers, and also would be picked apart by the media, would be criticised in a very different way. There's a certain remove.
There's a distance,
Yeah.
She said the reason she started showing in New York was because it was when she was living in LA, so the commute was much easier for her to
But
show in New York.
I think she should show in Paris. I don't know why. I feel this is...
I just don't think cities matter anymore, though.
It doesn't matter
I
anymore.
don't think it does.
It does in terms of attendance.
Yeah,
there are
of
very
course.
few people that, I mean, in New York, you're
But
slightly
does
isolated.
But does attendance matter anymore?
And in a way, you're slightly isolated from, well, yeah, no, absolutely. If someone's not attending your show, they won't review your show.
Would they buy
Does
your
that matter,
show?
though?
No. Same thing.
I
I guess
think-
they could see it there, but of course it matters. Of course press matters in
It's
fashion.
dusting.
No, I think it does matter, but I'm not saying, obviously.
It's absolutely a consideration for designers.
Of course it is, but I think the difference between showing in New York and Paris and the quantity of reviews that you'd get is so minimal.
No, it's massive.
It is
Really?
It's massive.
difference.
Loads, so few people from London go to New York. So few people go.
But
a lot, you know, like.
But I think for a designer such as her, I think for a young brand, you know.
But as in major newspapers, we've only recently started going and covering New York. There are other, the Evening Standard haven't
yeah, but
sent
I think for
people
a
to cover
brand
New
such as
York.
her, she knows that they will still probably write about it, whether they're there or not. I agree with you; it would make a huge difference.
But
she
they won't
still
get
gets
but they won't get a
stockists,
review in a fashion sense.
Yeah.
And that's just a very different kind of validation than the Daily Mail writing about it.
She wants to be put within that context of like, a fashion sense, I think. 'Cause
So I do think
the idea that stockists might
But
still
then she'd
come
get
in,
more of a
I don't
fashion
know.
sense review if she was in Paris.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's a very difficult thing to figure out where you sit correctly in the
Yeah.
fashion world. You know, like why doesn't Marc Jacobs show in Paris?
Yeah.
It's, why don't Proenza show in Paris? I think there's very difficult things, and there are all different kinds, levels of considerations to be, and it's not just about people attending, it's about who you're contrasted against, how much attention you can get. What else is going on? Will you be the front page on Womenswear? Will you be the front page on, the New York Times? There are all those kind of considerations going on.
Yeah.
And really, where she shows in New York is incredibly clever because she's always in every British newspaper. Every British newspaper that's in New York puts her in the next day, and she generally makes the cover. Always, absolutely.
But it's
Do
funny
you not
how
think
she
that would
went
happen
from...
wherever she was?
Sorry, can you say
No,
again?
it depends what she's up against.
I asked if he thinks it would happen wherever she
Absolutely
was.
depends what she's up against.
Obviously, she's up
Yeah.
against Burberry, probably not, but like.
But it depends. It absolutely depends what she's up against and what other news
I do
stories
think
are
you'd
happening.
struggle to find a day across the fashion calendar in all 4 cities where she wouldn't make the front page.
But would she be able to get onto the schedule there?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's not. You can't just
Rock
decide
up.
that you're going to show in the middle of Paris.
Rock up and take Yoji's
Rock up to the show every single time.
One thing, just talking about scheduling and just to kind of round things off, because I'm conscious of time, obviously it's a time of change in New York because we're going to see that they're going to have their menswear shenanigans. They're kicking off doing a menswear week for to sort of get into that, all that coverage that's surrounding menswear. What do we think of that?
What do we think of
It's
New
going
York
to be in
having
July,
men's-
yeah.
I don't know if people have got time to do.
I think you have to ask Alex more than anybody else.
Yeah,
because
because I mean, I-
well, you don't cover men, do you?
I cover
Yeah,
men,
so-
but I'm not going to go to New York.
Do you think
Menswear.
people, but what's
They don't have a significant advertiser
Exactly.
that I'm aware of that can justify the expense of going over.
but also what do you think the reason is for them to do it?
Don't know. I think it's that everyone else has
Everyone
one and
else
they
has
feel
got
like they
one,
should
yeah.
have one. I mean, financially, there were these very interesting figures that were released by the New York Fashion Week governing body. That New York Fashion Week last year made close to $1 billion for the city, and that it was a bigger, in terms of the capital it generated, it was bigger than the US Open, the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's the same in London. It
New York
makes
Marathon.
so much money in tourism and like
Yeah.
hotels and
Yeah,
stuff.
also the Super Bowl is one day. Like the
Yeah,
Fashion Week
yeah.
is 1 week. But you know, also again, men's, as we know, in the past 2 years now, is growing faster than women. It's a whole new,
Growing
Yeah,
faster.
whole
it's the
new
one
sector. And of
thing.
course, you know,
Yeah,
to
they wanna
be
get on it.
considered a fashion city, it's better now to have a men's fashion week. I just think, I don't know how you guys do it. I just think there's something every other day,
Yeah.
every other, now also with the cruise being presented all over the globe.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
now, you know, Valentino is showing couture in Rome,
In Rome.
Yeah.
and then Dolce & Gabbana in Capri, but then Paris is happening at the same time. How do you people do? I'm so glad to be out of all of that.
But I think what's made it scary
Yeah, but you
is
still
that
have to work and
I can
sit
sleep
and
on
study.
planes. It's really a really good skill.
No, I
I
know,
can
but
sleep on the
sometimes-
plane on the way
But
to
But
something.
sometimes you need to sit at your office to
Yeah.
study, to work, to
or just go
concentrate.
and see
You're
things
always
that
on the
aren't
run.
clothes.
Yeah.
Like that's the big problem.
it's-
Like go and look at things that aren't just fashion. I think that's the problem with a lot of.
So
But
it's
that's
a
all
little
they
bit
get to
too much,
see.
I think. It's going to be soon 52 years
Yeah.
a week.
But I think it's
52
really
weeks a
interesting
year.
what Alex said when he said, oh, you know, there's not a major advertiser or like a reason to go. What scares me about all this scheduling is it has, because there's so much, before it kind of was like, you'd go to Paris Fashion Week and maybe you went because of an advertiser, but you could see everything else. And I think now the problem is rather than you going to Paris Fashion Week or going to London Fashion Week, people are going because a brand takes them and they go see that brand show and they're there to cover that brand and then they come back, and it's like press are being treated just as kind of like this conduits to talk about certain brands rather than as reporters who...
I don't
Yeah.
think
Look
that
at
happens so
different
much
jolly.
with fashion weeks. I do think,
I think it does increasingly. You speak to so many magazine journalists and you're like, oh, how long are you in Paris for? They're like, oh, I just came out for X. And then they're there for 2 days and they go home.
Right.
okay, I've never experienced that with
Do you not?
But when you-
certainly not with Paris Fashion Week. Paris Fashion
But
Week.
what
is the
about when
one.
you're
So
flown
much.
to
People that go
Tokyo
for 2
to
or 3.
see... What about when you're flown in some destination just to see one show? Do you honestly feel you have to write positive about that, or do you feel free?
No. No, I don't.
Honestly. Okay,
I
that's
don't.
good.
And then I know that I might not be invited the next time, and that's
Okay.
fine.
But do you
That's
not
good.
just
That's
think
fair enough for
even
me.
the notion of being flown to see a certain show, that
Literally.
becoming
And
the
wine and
norm for
dine
the
and-
relationship
Oh,
between
yeah.
a journalist and a fashion critic, a journalist in a fashion house, is quite strange. That it's become that you're kind of invited there, you look at it.
But I
it's
think
you're
very much
dispatched.
people are staging those shows as they are a show of the might of a brand.
Yeah.
That's why they're staging those cruise shows. And I'd much rather they did that than have a cruise week that I had to go to.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Like, you know, it's about an experience as well. It's not just about going and seeing a show. There's an experience around it. A lot of the time there will be like an exhibition or something like that, there are cultural activities. And really it's about kind of taking you into this universe, which is, it's a wonderful experience to be able to go and see that, and the various add-ons of the trip, to meet different people, to get a sense of different cultures. That is an
But the
incredible
difference is that
experience.
they pay for you to go
Yeah.
because there's not a fashion. I mean, the difference between this and Fashion Week is that
But then
you
a lot
fly
of,
yourself
but then a lot
to
of
Fashion
people
Week.
take
You're more independent.
people
But,
out.
but they don't now. That's what's scary. I think.
Yeah, but mostly
Yeah.
they do. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
people
they-
like
they
Alex,
do.
they do. I don't
Yeah.
think he goes just for one show.
Yeah.
But then when you go to, not to mention name, to Chanel in Vienna or New
Dallas.
York or Dallas, you're paid to go there, and that's what for me makes the difference.
And-
That's why I'm
I
asking.
know when you are
I
in
know
Dallas.
you're honest and outspoken, so you're
Yeah.
the best
But
person
not
to
that
ask.
many are.
I
think that's
mean,
the problem.
do you feel that you can say whatever you want? Then of course they put up a show which is amazing and they're powerful brand. I don't think.
I mean, it's
Dior
quite
will show
difficult
up
because
that
you
collection.
go, and of course it's going to be amazing because they've spent all this money and they've taken you out to go to
Yeah.
this specific thing, and then they've created a collection especially around it. So of course, in a sense, of course, it's incredible because the whole experience of it is incredible. And when I've written about it, I've tended to write about that experience. The
Yeah.
whole act of going out to Dubai and going across in
Yeah.
boats and going to this custom-built palace. If I wasn't kind of awed by that, I should quit now. It's an awe-inspiring experience for
No, I
anyone to go and
understand
do
that.
that. And I get what you're saying, but in a sense, I think by the very fact they're doing that, they're like, okay, so we have to amaze you. This has to be incredible.
Yeah.
Because you
So
are
they
taking
push-
time out of your day and committing to come and see this.
Understood.
But on the other hand, the way that I look at quite a few of these is I will I will go for the minimum amount of time that I need to be out of my office. So I will leave in the morning, I will see a show, and when I went to Dubai, I came back straight after the show. I left and I got a flight at 2 a.m. to come back and go into the office the next day. For me, it was like if somebody had, it was like a very expensive taxi ride to the show, see a show, come back.
Very expensive.
And it's very good you can sleep as well.
Yeah,
it works.
you know, it's that.
I can sleep on planes
Yeah,
too,
me
so
too.
that I understand.
And I wouldn't really feel massively beholden if someone offered to take me there in a car. Like, you know, if someone offered to bring me there in a car, that's the way that I think you have to look at it objectively.
But I think that's great, but that's because you're a fantastic journalist that isn't afraid to speak your mind.
But I think
there's
also
a lot
my
of journalists
journalism
that
is
probably they're the consumers in them get a little bit pie-eyed
But
by
my
it.
journalism is
Magazine
also a very
especially.
specific type of journalism. If I was writing for
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
title,
yeah.
I'm writing with a critical voice. Other times
critic,
I'm
yeah.
writing with a reportage voice or a celebratory voice,
Yeah.
which is absolutely fine. You know, different publications, I don't expect everybody to be
be
as
as
kind
free.
of cold-hearted and objective as I am. Like, and to be honest, I'm not always cold-hearted and objective. I do sometimes go to a show and you're like, this is so amazing. And maybe I can't imagine anyone ever wearing it. Maybe I would never wear it. But it's so incredible. You know, my favourite show that I didn't go to is still that Galliano opera show. You know, the Opera Garnier d'Or Couture. And you look at it and it's completely insane. But there's no way you couldn't go and absolutely fall in love with that show. And I think that's what it's about for me. It's not
So actually
necessarily...
not being afraid to be
understand.
seen to just gush and fall in
Yeah,
love occasionally.
if you think it's amazing,
Yeah.
then, you know, you think it's amazing.
But I think as a newspaper critic, you're more aware of
There's
that.
a bit more objectivity.
Yeah, but if you're a magazine, you want to gush for your readers because they're going to wish that they were there maybe as well. And it's about giving them
And
aspiration.
also, you're massive advertisers.
Oh yeah.
Much more than to
There's
the
different
Guardian.
pressures.
I mean, Condé Nast, there's different pressure than a newspaper where someone is a fashion critic and not.
But also I think where
Stylist
your
who has to give
advertising
you credit.
revenue comes from a lot of different places, you know.
Yeah.
But you still got advertised, you know, you still have that model within
Yeah, but no,
newspapers.
it's not the same pressure. I've been an advertiser. I know how I was wined and dined by who and how. So, you know, I've been on the other side for a long time, and it's a very different environment.
Conscious that we could go forever.
Yeah, it's
Nice to close New York with a discussion about the commerce of fashion.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking, that it's very apt, but great discussion, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Should we give all the designers a round of applause for giving us some good stuff to talk
Yeah.
about?